Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome into a new episode of Capitol View, a daily journal produced webcast coming to you each week. I'm your host, Brad Locke, joined as always by Bobby Harrison, our Capitol Bureau Chief down in Jackson. I'm bringing us the latest on what's happening with the state legislature and everything else going on down there. Bobby, how you doing?
All right, Brad, how you doing?
Can't complain, sir. Can't complain. It's a Monday, but it could be worse.
Another bright sunny day in Jackson.
Yeah, it doesn't feel very October-y out there, though, which is kind of a disappointment.
No, it doesn't.
No, it does not, but that's okay. We've got plenty to talk about. I want to kind of focus in on education funding. That's been kind of a hot topic in recent days, Bobby. Just last week, a bit kind of out of nowhere, I guess, a little bit. It was not expected anyway. Republican leaders announced they had hired this New Jersey company called EdBuild. That's Ed as in education and build, BUILD. To basically revamp or modernize, however you want to put it, the Mississippi Adequate Education Program, the education funding for Mississippi schools, Bobby. And I mean, this was something that had been discussed in the past, kind of retooling this, but I guess the timing was not maybe what people expected.
No, it was out of the blue. I think that was on a Tuesday or Thursday. I know it wasn't Wednesday, but it was. I guess it was a Tuesday. The spokespeople for the lieutenant governor announced that the lieutenant governor speaker were going to be having a press conference, and nobody knew what it was about. And what it was about was they had hired this EdBuild, as you had referred to undertake revamping, modernizing, whatever you want to call it, the Mississippi Adequate Education Program, which was passed in 1997 and is the primary method that the state uses to fund local school districts. So it was a unusual announcement. There was a lot of sort of unanswered questions that still hadn't been answered. Like, how did they come to the conclusion? How did they decide on EdBuild? It was a no big process. EdBuild was just selected, and so that was kind of unusual. No one had heard of them before here in Mississippi, and then also private donors are paying half the cost for EdBuild to do this. It's going to be a $250,000 project, but private donors will pay half that cost.
And of course, this immediately raised some red flags with some education proponents and some Democrats. I know Nancy Loom with the Parents Campaign said it raised some red flags. And the question, I guess the main concern was, well, this would be some kind of backdoor roundabout attempt to get more charter schools in Mississippi. But Philip Gunn, Speaker of the House, he said that's not the case, right?
Right. The reason charter schools came up is that has been a primary issue for the legislative leadership in recent years, is to enhance and expand the state's charter school law. And of course, charter schools are classified as public schools, but they don't have to follow a lot of the rules and guidelines of traditional public schools, and they're not governed by the traditional public school governing authority. They're not governed by the local school board and the local superintendent. But as you said, Speaker Gunn said that there would be no effort to use this process to expand the charter school law. He said he wanted to see what the legislature has passed in the past couple of years is working before there's any additional effort to expand that law. So if people are concerned about that, I think that takes that issue off the table, at least it appears to.
Yeah, and Rebecca Sibilia, the founder and CEO of EdBuild, and she had been associated, I guess, with charter schools in the past, and maybe that's why people had concerns. But she says that's not the main goal of this. Basically, the main goal of this, her organization, is to take these education funding formulas like the one we have here in Mississippi, and I guess update them. I mean, this one has been called antiquated, and again, people say it needs to be modernized. And is there a general agreement that that's the case? I know it hasn't been fully funded.
No, I don't think there is. This it was passed in '97, and it's important to note that the education funding formula that was being used in Mississippi before the Adequate Education Program was passed in '97 was actually passed in like the late 1940s or early 1950s. I'm not sure. So I mean, the minimum program, as it was called, was around a long time before the Adequate Education Program was. And what was unique about the Adequate Education Program, and is still unique, and it's kind of the cornerstone, is I try to explain this real as simply as I can. It's really not complicated, but the state determines how much it costs to educate a child by taking local school districts in Mississippi that are operating on a C level and are efficient, and they determine how much that they determine it takes $5,000 to educate a child, and they look at how much money the local school districts have in terms of property taxes, and so the state makes up the difference to get everybody to that $5,000 level, and the school district wants, and I use $5,000 to say, not that I'm just using that as an arbitrary figure.
Right.
And if the local school district wants to go up above that amount, they can, but every school district is supposed to get that amount. Now, what supporters of MAP would say that this formula has never had a chance because it's only been fully funded twice since it was enacted in '97. So they would say that it's not antiquated; it's just not being properly funded, and that's been the problem with the formula in the past years.
So what can you tell us about EdBuild as far as how they like to approach things? I know they tend to focus on individualized student needs. They believe that's how it should be funded.
Yeah, well, yeah, they talk about sort of put more emphasis on individual student need, and especially that they use special education as an example instead of just giving a set amount of money for each special education student. They say the state should give the amount needed for that particular student. So that would actually be welcomed by all, I think, everybody in education circles in Mississippi if they did that. Of course, they could do that as a component of MAEP too, but instead of just saying each student would have $6,500, for instance, some students, special needs students, take a great deal more money than that to educate. So that would be if they did that, if that was a change in the formula they did, I think that'd be welcome by everybody. But that would cost more money, Brad. And the issue with MAEP so far has been not enough money to fund MAEP. So that's another issue. If they're going to change it to cost more money, can they fund that?
That's a good question, Bobby. But you also had a story related to this last week. The Mississippi Association of School Superintendents have voiced their support of revamping this formula. I mean, how important is that right now to have them kind of on board early on?
Well, I think it was important for the superintendents more so than it was for anybody else. The superintendents have been vocal in trying to get more, get MAEP fully funded, or at least closer to fully funded. They supported an initiative to change the Constitution back in last year, a voter initiative that would have enhanced the state's commitment to public education. That initiative was opposed by the legislative leadership, and of course, that Initiative 42 was defeated by a narrow margin. And so the superintendents have been sort of at odds with legislative leadership in recent years. So I think they said we need to come out and support this, hopefully have a seat at the table and have some impact on the final outcome. I think that was the way they were looking at this whole scenario.
I know one concern, I think it may have been Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves said he had, was too much money going towards administrative costs. And Gerald Loden of the superintendent of Tupelo Public Schools, and Jimmy Weeks, Lee County School Superintendent, they have kind of, looks like they're behind this basically, but they do kind of take issue a little bit with that, saying really administrative costs not as high as maybe people would have you believe.
Yeah, and they're actually on the board of directors, so they would have voted on to endorse this revamping of the funding formula. But they both say that they are, at least their school districts, they're focusing on the classroom, not on administration. Part of the issue, I think, Brad, that's not talked about a lot when you talk about administrative costs, and school superintendents will tell you in recent years they've lost a lot of veteran teachers that, the teachers make more money the longer they work. And so those veteran teachers have been replaced by younger teachers who don't make as much money. And so that's driven down the cost in the classroom some. But I mean, there's just a lot of, Mississippi's kind of reached a point where there's a lot of teachers that's been in the classroom for a long time that's ready to leave for whatever reason. And that's kind of, I think that has an impact on the administrative cost versus classroom cost.
All right. Well, good stuff here, Bobby, as always. We'll keep this story, we'll track this story going forward, see what happens with this Ed build and everything. Also, if you want to hear more from Bobby on this situation, he was on today's episode of the Memo podcast, which will drop later this afternoon. Listen to it for free in iTunes, your podcast apps, or at memo.djournal.com. If you want to give Bobby a follow on Twitter, find him at Bobby Harrison9. I'm at Brad Locke. And that's it for this week on Capitol View. We'll be back next week. Again, to talk about what's happening with the legislature and everything down there in Jackson. If you missed this, the replay is available at djournal.com. Tell your friends about it, okay? Good stuff, Bobby, as always.
All right. Appreciate it, Brad.
All right. Until next time, y'all have a good week.